The church smelled like white roses and lies. I stood at the altar in a dress that cost more than most people's cars, holding a bouquet of lilies I hadn't chosen, wearing a veil I hadn't wanted. About to marry a man whose hands had never once made me feel safe. The organ music swelled. 200 guests sat in perfect rows. My father beamed from the front pew, and somewhere in the back of that cathedral I knew without looking Damien Cross was watching me. He was always watching me. That was the job. That was what Marcus Hale paid him millions to do, keep his daughter alive, keep her breathing, keep her out of danger. For 3 years, Damien had stood in doorways and sat in black SUVs and tasted my food before I touched it, and slept in the room next to mine with a weapon under his pillow. For 3 years, he had been a wall between me and the world, professional, quiet, immovable, and then the doors at the back of the cathedral exploded open, not with a crash, not with gunfire. Just with him, 6'2" of controlled fury in a dark suit that didn't belong at a wedding like this, walking down the center aisle like every single person in those pews was invisible. The music cut off, 200 heads turned. My groom, Elliot Vance, went very, very still beside me. Damien didn't stop walking, my father stood. "What the hell do you think? Sit down, Marcus." Damien's voice was flat, and my father, a man who made senators nervous, actually hesitated. That alone should have told everyone in that room something was wrong. Damien reached the altar. He looked at Elliot first, and what was in his eyes was not anger. It was colder than that. Then he looked at me, and for one single second the coldness broke, and what replaced it was something I had never seen on his face before. Something that looked like it had been locked away for years and had finally, at the worst possible moment, gotten loose. "I'm sorry," he said, only to me, like no one else was in the room. "I should have told you sooner. I couldn't prove it until last night." "Damien," I started. He reached into his jacket. Half the room flinched. He pulled out a folded envelope and held it toward me. Elliot moved fast. He grabbed my wrist and yanked me backward, and in that split second, that single ugly, reflexive move, 200 people saw exactly what kind of man Elliot Vance was when things stopped going his way. Damien was faster. He was always faster. He caught my arm before I stumbled, stepped in front of me, and looked at Elliot with the kind of stillness that professionals use when they are deciding exactly how much damage they are willing to do in a cathedral full of witnesses. "Don't," was all Damien said. Elliot smiled. And that smile was the first true thing I had ever seen on his face. It wasn't charming or handsome. It was the smile of someone doing math. Someone calculating odds. "You have nothing," Elliot said quietly. "You're an employee. You'll be fired before you reach the parking lot. And she," he looked at me, "belongs to this family now." Belongs, I had heard that word before from men like him. I had been trained my whole life to smile at it. I took the envelope from Damien's hand. What was inside took me 45 seconds to read. Bank transfer records. A private communication between Elliot Vance and a man named Goretti. A name I recognized because my father had mentioned him once, casually. The way powerful men mention arrangements they don't want examined. Goretti ran shipping. Elliot ran finance, and the arrangement between them ran directly through a pipeline that my father's company had been used to mask. $300 million. Not a wedding, an acquisition of the company, of the access, of me. My hands were shaking, the guests were murmuring. My father was moving toward the altar. I looked at Elliot. I looked at this man I had said yes to 6 months ago. This man who had kissed me softly and looked at me like I was precious. This man who had held my hand at charity dinners and laughed at my jokes, and met my eyes across crowded rooms, and made me believe, finally, after years of loneliness inside guarded houses, that someone saw me. "How long?" I asked him. He didn't answer, which was its own kind of answer. My father reached us. He looked at the papers in my hand. Something moved across his face, not surprise, discomfort. Recognition, and that was the moment everything broke. "You knew," I said. "Mara, you knew what he was." My voice came out very quiet, the quietest I had ever heard it. "You set this up." My father's jaw tightened. "It's a merger, a business decision. Elliot is a good man. He's from the right." "Stop." I looked at Damien. "Is there more?" "The car outside," Damien said carefully, "is not going to a honeymoon suite." He paused. "There's a flight plan filed under Elliot's company, private jet, out of the country. No return date." The cathedral went absolutely silent. I had 1 second to decide. 1 second to choose between the world I had lived in my entire life. The one with the marble floors and the security teams and the suffocating safety of a father who controlled everything, and the man standing in front of me who had just burned every professional relationship. He had to hand me an envelope. I dropped the bouquet. Elliot grabbed my arm. Damien's hand closed over his wrist with the kind of pressure that makes bones feel very fragile, and Elliot let go immediately, breath hissing through his teeth. "If you follow us out of this building," Damien said to the room, to my father, to Elliot, to every suited, pearl-wearing, champagne-breathed person in those pews, "you will regret it." He took my hand. Not grabbed, took, like something delicate he had been waiting a very long time to touch. We walked out of the cathedral together. The car was already running. A black Range Rover, engine warm, facing away from the city. He opened the door, I got in, and we were moving before anyone made it to the steps. For a long time, neither of us said anything. The city slid past the windows, then the suburbs, then open road and gray mountains ahead, and still I hadn't found the words and he wasn't pushing me for them. That was so like him. That had always been so like him. 3 years of never pushing. 3 years of standing close enough that I always knew he was there, never so close that I'd feel crowded. "You've been investigating him," I said finally. "For how long?" "For months." He kept his eyes on the road. "I had suspicions from the first night you brought him to the house." The way he cataloged the security setup, like he was memorizing it. "You should have told me. I didn't have proof, I knew how it would look." "Your father's employee accusing his hand-picked son-in-law." He paused. "I also knew you were happy." Those last 4 words landed somewhere soft and devastating. "Damien, I didn't want to be the reason for that to stop." His voice didn't waver, but something in it cost him something. "Even if I was right. Even if it meant watching you walk down that aisle." I stared at his profile. The hard jaw and the dark eyes, and the scar along his temple from a job 2 years ago when a man with a knife had gotten too close. I had held ice against that cut. He had sat very still and not looked at me the entire time. I had thought it was professionalism. "Where are we going?" I asked. "Somewhere safe." "Old contact of mine, mountain property, off any grid Elliot or your father has access to. We need 48 hours to get those documents to the right people. After that, you can go wherever you want." He said the last part like it was important, like he needed me to understand it was a choice. My choice. "What about you?" "I'll be fine." "That's not what I asked." He didn't answer immediately. The road climbed. Trees closed in on both sides, dark and dense, the last of the afternoon light going gold through the branches. And then, somewhere behind us, headlights appeared, more than one set. "They're faster than I expected," Damien said, not panicked, just recalibrated. He accelerated, and I felt the car shift under us, responding, and his hands on the wheel were completely steady. "Elliot's people, or your father's, at this point I'm not sure there's a difference." The mountain road narrowed. He took a curve at a speed that pressed me into the door. And I grabbed the handle and didn't make a sound because I had spent 3 years watching this man operate under pressure. And I knew, I absolutely knew, that panic would cost us more than the curve. Would. The headlights fell back, then disappeared around a switchback. Damien took a hard turn onto an unmarked road, killed the lights, and drove by memory for half a mile before pulling behind a tree line and cutting the engine. Silence hit us like something physical. We sat there in the dark, breathing, listening to the blood in our ears. On the road below, 2 black cars accelerated past without slowing. I let out a breath that had been living in my chest for what felt like an hour. "You memorized this road," I said. "I memorized every road within 40 miles of your house." A pause. 3 years ago. I turned to look at him in the dark. He was already looking at me, and this time he didn't look away. "Why did you take this job?" I asked. "My father must have approached a lot of people. You were already out. You had other options." He was quiet for a long time. "I saw a photograph," he said. "Your father was vetting candidates, and there was a photograph in the brief. You at some fundraiser. You were laughing at something, and everyone around you was looking at their phones." "And I don't know," he stopped, started again. "I thought someone should be paying attention." Something inside me cracked wide open. "Damien, don't." His voice was careful. "I know what I was. I know what I am. You don't have to." I used to take the long way through the East Wing, I said, just to walk past wherever you were standing. The silence after that was a completely different kind of silence. Mara, 3 years, I said. Every morning I checked what time you started your shift. Every night I said good night like it was nothing, like it cost me nothing, because I thought it was impossible. Because I thought you saw me as a job. I felt my voice threaten to break and refused to let it. And then you walked into that cathedral and blew up your entire career, and I need you to understand that the documents were not the only reason I took your hand. He closed his eyes. Just for a moment, like someone who has been holding an enormous weight for a very long time and has just been told they can set it down. When he opened them, he reached across the console, slowly, giving me every opportunity to stop him. His hand came to rest against the side of my face, tilted upward, and I leaned into it like a person who has been cold for years leaning toward the first source of heat. I should have found a way to tell you, he said, before it got to this. You told me when it mattered. It should have mattered sooner. I covered his hand with mine. We have time now. The cabin was another hour into the mountains, an old ranger station converted by someone who clearly valued isolation over aesthetics. Stone walls, a wood stove, 2 cots and a table and a window that looked out over a valley so dark and deep it might as well have been the edge of the world. He got the stove going. I sat in front of it and finally, let the weight of the day come down. The dress was ridiculous in this room. All that white tulle and pearl embroidery, designed for photographs, designed for a day that was supposed to announce me as properly acquired. I looked down at it and felt something I hadn't expected to feel. Relief. Damien came and sat beside me. He had taken off his jacket. For the first time in 3 years, he was just a man in a shirt with his sleeves rolled up. No weapon visible, no door to guard, no professional distance to maintain. He handed me a cup of something hot. Our fingers touched. What happens after 48 hours? I asked. The documents reach a federal contact I trust. Elliot and whoever is behind the money structure gets investigated. Your father, he stopped. I can't predict what happens to your father. He chose a business deal over me. Yes, that was probably not the first time. No, Damien said quietly. It wasn't. I had known that on some level for years. Had known it the way you know things you aren't ready to say out loud. My father's world was made of transactions, and I had always been, on some shelf somewhere, an asset to be deployed at the right moment. The guards, the gates, the millions spent on my security, it had never entirely been about love. Some of it had been about the value of the asset, but Damien had always been different. Damien had paid attention when no one else was looking. After 48 hours, I said, I would like to go somewhere that no one has chosen for me. Okay, I would like to choose who comes with me. He looked at me. In the firelight, with all the professional armor finally gone, he looked like the truest version of himself, steady and careful and quietly, devastatingly sincere. Is that an offer? He asked. It's a question. I held his gaze. Do you want to come? He didn't answer with words. He reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind my ear with a gentleness that seemed almost impossible for hands that had spent a decade being weapons. And then he leaned his forehead against mine. And we sat like that for a long time while the fire burned low, and the mountains held their silence around us. Outside, somewhere far down the valley, a pair of headlights swept the road and kept going. Gone into the dark, not finding us. For the first time in as long as I could remember, I was not a destination. I was not a prize or a pipeline or an arrangement. I was just a woman in a ridiculous white dress, sitting next to a man who had once seen a photograph at a job briefing and thought someone should be paying attention. He had paid attention for 3 years. He had walked into a cathedral and burned everything down. He was still here. By morning, the documents were already moving through the right channels. By afternoon, Elliot Vance's legal team was in emergency meetings. By the time the sun went down on the second day, 2 federal investigators had names and accounts and a paper trail that led exactly where Damien said it would. My father called 11 times. I answered on the 12th. The conversation was short. I said, I know what the wedding was. I know what you traded me for, he said. Mara, it was never that simple, I said. It was exactly that simple. And then I said the thing I had needed to say for 28 years of living behind walls someone else had chosen. "I'm done being kept, Dad, by anyone." I hung up. Damien was standing in the doorway when I turned around. He had that look on his face, the one I had catalogued over 3 years without ever letting myself name it. The one that said, "I see you, not the asset, not the job, you—" "Ready," he said. I looked at the room, at the stone walls and the wood stove and the window with the view of the valley, at the man in the doorway who had blown up his life to hand me an envelope. "Where are we going?" I asked. He smiled. It was the first time in 3 years I had seen him smile without something guarded behind it. "Wherever you want." I crossed the room. I took his hand, not the way a frightened woman takes a bodyguard's hand, not the way someone grabs a lifeline, but the way a person reaches for something they have decided, clearly and completely, to choose. We walked out into the mountain light together. No one was waiting. No one was watching. No security detail, no arrangement, no cathedral full of people who had never once paid attention. Just open road, and the first real choice I had ever made, and a man who had once thought someone should be paying attention and never, not once in 3 years, had looked away.